One of the biggest influences on what became the Orthodox Christian conception of God was a philosopher and mystic named Plotinus. Plotinus was born and raised in Roman Egypt in the 3rd century CE, when Christianity had already taken root and spread throughout the Roman Empire, including in Egypt. But Plotinus himself was not a Christian, although it is not accurate to call him a pagan either. Instead, he regarded himself as a faithful disciple of Plato and is one of the originators of what today is known as Neoplatonism. But Plotinus was more than a philosopher. He was a religious mystic, meaning his ideas originated not only from concepts about God, but from his own mystical experiences of God. He usually did not describe these experiences, however, with the Greek word for God, theos, but simply used the term the One. Moreover, Plotinus's the One is very different from the anthropomorphic personal God associated with traditional monotheism. The One does not possess a personality or a will or even sentience. There is a sense in which the One does nothing at all, but only emanates or overflows, and in so doing causes everything to exist. Plotinus insisted the One did not even exist as other things exist, but transcended both existence and non-existence, being and nothingness. Plotinus did, however, use Aristotle's concept of the Nous, meaning the divine wisdom or intelligence, to refer to what closely corresponds to the traditional concept of a personal God in monotheism. And he often referred to Nous with the Greek word for God, theos. Nous, however, is not the One, but emanates or overflows from the One. And because of this, we can think of the One as being the God of God. Plotinus' influence on what became the Orthodox conception of God is the most important factor distinguishing Orthodox from non-Orthodox, that is, heretical iterations of the Christian faith. For example, non-Orthodox traditions like the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons view God in wholly anthropomorphic terms as being a man who is immortal and in possession of superhuman powers. Call it the Superman understanding of God. They would regard the influence Plotinus' concept of the One had on the early church fathers as the corruption of New Testament Christianity by Hellenistic philosophy and spirituality. On the other hand, atheists and agnostics are likely to dismiss Plotinus' concept of the One as crass superstition. But for me personally, Plotinus' concept of the One has helped me rediscover God in recent years, as well as given me a deeper appreciation for the doctrine of the Trinity. The key to understanding what Plotinus means by the One is to focus on the mystical as opposed to the conceptual nature of the One. In other words, it is to focus on our actual experiences of the divine as opposed to divine as just an idea or abstraction, mental construct. This experience of the divine can be referred to as Paul Tillich's ground of all being, or Meister Eckhart's Der Grund, or what the Sufi mystic Ibn Arabi referred to as the unity of all being. But other than Plotinus' the One, I will mostly refer to it as existence itself. But because I use a reflexive pronoun itself, the implication is existence itself is a thing, an object. But this would be totally wrong. By existence itself, I do not mean what exists or a thing that exists, but existence purely as existence. But even by using the term existence purely as existence, or for that matter, any term, including the One, it is still an object, a thing. But this is only because, to borrow from an old Zen saying, what we're referring to is the finger pointing at the moon rather than the moon itself. In other words, simply by referring to the divine reality of the One, we refer more to the concept of the One rather than the One itself. This problem of how to refer to the One without implying that the One is just another thing, among other things, is reminiscent of the taboo the ancient Hebrews had against uttering the name of God, Yahweh. One reason behind this taboo may have been to utter God's name is to imply God is a created being rather than being itself. So what the viewer of this video needs to remember as I continue to describe Plotinus' concept of the one is while the concept of the one is a thing that exists, the reality to which it refers is not a thing, it's not an it. Instead, this reality is existence or being itself, or purely as existence. Or to put it another way, it is the source of all that exists, but not a thing that exists, and so it transcends both existence and non-existence. The concept of existence itself may strike many as hopelessly abstract. But when understood in a mystical sense, existence itself is the most visceral, most concrete experience imaginable. It is the experience of or sensation of existing, of being itself. Now just take a moment and consider what it feels like to exist. Of course, Plotinus was a product of his age, subject to the outmoded worldview of the time and ignorant of the incredible scientific knowledge we have gained in recent centuries. So let us examine Plotinus's the one of existence itself from the perspective of modern science to see how it holds up. For Plotinus, the one has always existed, or more precisely, has always transcended both existence and non-existence. In contrast, cosmologists agree the universe had a beginning in the Big Bang and will have an end in the distant future. But it would be wrong to conclude from this nothing existed before the Big Bang or will exist after the end of the universe, when the last black hole has completely evaporated into Hawking radiation. At the very least, the potentiality for the Big Bang had to exist somehow, somewhere, and this same potentiality will continue to exist long after the universe ends in heat death. The so-called cosmological argument for the existence of God claims assuming every effect has a cause, in order to avoid an infinite regress of causes, eventually there is to be an uncaused cause. And traditional monotheists assume this uncaused cause is an infinite, eternal, although anthropomorphic God. If, however, we think of existence itself as pure potentiality, then this pure potentiality could be the uncaused cause, rather than what we usually conceive as a personal anthropomorphic God. And indeed, Plotinus sometimes refers to the one as pure potentiality in his writings. It is important to understand the one or existence itself is not the universe itself. Plotinus was no pantheist. Universes come and go, but the one, existence itself, is eternal, existing both within and without space and time. One big difference between Plotinus' Platonic worldview and the predominant scientific worldview today has to do with the fundamental building blocks of reality. That is, what are they? For Plotinus, these fundamental building blocks were Plato's non-material forms or essences. In contrast, the contemporary scientific view is that the building blocks of reality are material, physical, or more precisely, subatomic particles. More and more scientists are, however, beginning to view information rather than matter as the most fundamental building blocks of reality. And what is information but patterns not unlike Plato's forms or essences? But there is an even more fundamental objection to the whole mind versus matter dichotomy behind this debate concerning whether forms or subatomic particles are the fundamental building blocks of reality. It is that at its very root, mind versus matter is a false dichotomy, since both refer to the same, more fundamental reality, namely experience, albeit two different types or categories of experience. We regard a rock as matter since we experience it while awake and through our five senses. We regard a dream as mind since we experience it while we are asleep and so assume it is a product of our own minds. But the only way we come to know both the dream and the rock is through experience as organized and interpreted by our minds. The most fundamental, most concrete building blocks of reality as we know it is, therefore, neither forms nor subatomic particles, but experience as interpreted by our minds. Sure, we can infer the existence of atoms and Platonic forms from this experience, but it is still a second-hand inference rather than first-hand knowledge in its most concrete, most direct form. And this is the only way we can truly come to know the One as well. That is through experiencing existence itself, being itself. The most defining feature of Christian orthodoxy is the doctrine of the Trinity, that God is three and one at the same time. Now, while it could be argued that the Trinity is implied in the New Testament, nowhere in the Bible do we find the actual word Trinity. Why then has the doctrine of the Holy Trinity become so important in Christian orthodoxy? So important, in fact, Christians use the presence or absence of belief in the Trinity as a way of distinguishing between orthodoxy and heresy. The doctrine of the Trinity arose, at least in part, because the church fathers wanted to make room for Plotinus God of God, under the larger umbrella of the concept of the Holy Trinity. In this Neoplatonic understanding of the Trinity, the infinite became finite, the eternal became temporal, and the impersonal became a person in the incarnation or enfleshment of Jesus Christ. When understood in this way, the doctrine of the Holy Trinity allows Christians such as myself to worship both Plotinus God of God and the personal God revealed by Jesus of Nazareth. On the other hand, Plotinus God of God offers an attractive alternative to any and all anthropomorphic conceptions of God, like the old man in the sky. After all, why worship God when we can worship the God of God?